On Thursday, December 30th, 2021, the communities in and around Boulder County, Colorado experienced what is to date the most destructive fire in the state's history. While the area was accustomed to dry conditions, high winds, and even wildfires, the unpredictability and devastation of the Marshall Fire was unprecedented. This fire, which started as a wildfire but rapidly evolved into an urban conflagration, was fueled by extremely dry vegetation and wind gusts that reached 115 miles per hour. It burned everything in its path as it jumped over a 6-lane highway with ease. Entire subdivisions were decimated despite the heroic efforts of hundreds, if not thousands, of emergency personnel. Approximately 35,000 individuals were evacuated from their homes with little to no time to grab personal belongings. The fire also threatened a number of residential care facilities and hospitals, forcing them to evacuate vulnerable and critically sick patients into a healthcare system that was already incredibly stressed due to the COVID-19 Omicron surge and staffing shortages. The following day, New Year's Eve, as snow fell from the sky, the community was able to take in the full impact of the Marshall Fire. Just over 6,000 acres had burned, with 1,084 homes destroyed and 159 structures damaged. While the damage assessment and recovery process is ongoing, it is estimated that the fire caused more than $2 billion in losses. Remarkably, there were no serious injuries to first responders. However, tragically, 2 members of the community did lose their lives. The communities that were impacted by this historic event continue to recover and rebuild their lives. And while those first responders and healthcare workers who worked tirelessly to protect their communities are working to heal and recover, they also recognize the importance of sharing their stories and learning from this incident so that they and others can be better prepared to respond and save lives. This 4-part Marshall Fire Learning Series brings the stories from fire and EMS responders, the hospital evacuation team, residential communities evacuations, and the efforts provided for regional coordination.
Hi everybody, welcome to the Marshall Fire Video Learning Series. This is on regional coordination that occurred during the fire itself. My name is Michelle Dealand. I currently serve as the Executive Director for the North Central Region Healthcare Coalition. During the fire, we were virtually activated to support the Boulder County EOC, ESF 8, Emergency Support Function 8 for Public Health and Medical, as well as our hospital, EMS, and other local health department partners. I'm joined today by a number of other key stakeholders who were part of the response to the Marshall Fire. Chris?
Hi everyone, my name is Chris Campbell. I'm the Emergency Manager with Boulder County Public Health. As Michelle mentioned, I worked and supported the Emergency Support Function 8 public health role during the Marshall Fire response, helping in a number of areas, and today our focus is regional coordination. So we supported sheltering and those that had access and functional needs during evacuations during this disaster. We'll talk a little bit more about our roles as we move into the discussion.
Hello, my name is Mike Chard. I'm the Director for the Boulder Office of Disaster Management, and I operate the Emergency Operations Center during the disaster and also serve the role as the Disaster Director. During the fire, I think is a good place to start is with the local coordination structures that are put into place when we have a response to something like the Marshall Fire. Our Emergency Operations Center, we use an ESF, which stands for Emergency Support Function model. We have 30 ESFs, and each one of those emergency support functions represents a coordination point to an operational capability that we bring online based around the consequences or the impacts that our community experiences during a disaster. The EOC's primary function is to provide a support for the response, provide coordination not just locally in our county, but also regionally, pick up state and also federal coordination as the incident starts to progress and get larger in size. The main challenges, obviously, with any coordination effort is that the larger the incident is, that stresses the sort of the theater of operations that you need to reach out and try to keep connected, but then also the speed, or what we call escalation, that can occur in a disaster. And each one is different, but the Marshall Fire was, as I think as everyone knows by now, was an extremely a different type of event. It was escalating quickly, it was moving fast through multiple levels of jurisdictional authority, and then it was bringing a whole set of problems that were happening faster than probably most humans could even probably process and maintain situational awareness around. And then that, of course, brought in a tremendous amount of resource support to be able to start addressing these impacts. And those were the beginning parts of the challenges that we have as a coordination center, is being able to keep an eye on what's going on, our situational awareness, as we call it, and then also knowing the agencies and the different levels of government that are going to need to be interfaced with and coordinated with, not just in a moment, but over the span of the disaster, from response fully into recovery. And during this event, those elements were putting us full tilt on our structures and our personnel to be able to accomplish this mission. And I'll pass it over to Chris, because Chris is one of the people I call right away. And he comes in and provides a valuable resource through our public health agency, through ESF 8 Public Health in our EOC. Chris?
Yes, I think what's really important about in this conversation, we're talking about regional coordination. We know that certainly disasters know no boundaries. We had an incredibly fast-moving incident and event with the Marshall Fire. So we had people evacuating in all directions in the county as quickly as they possibly could. And I think if you watch some of the footage, some of the body camera footage of our incredible first responders, it was incredibly hectic. So as public health, we support any sheltering that happens. If folks are evacuated and end up in an evacuation point, we help analyze access and functional needs. So those that have, if they work with durable medical equipment or rely on that. If they, additionally, if they have language access needs. And what we do know is some of the community members ended up in a different county, Broomfield County, and so there was a need regionally to coordinate with the partners there, which I think as we get into lessons learned, we can talk about that. But it's important to establish those relationships ahead of time. We know that certainly over the last couple of years, all of us have been in a pandemic response. If we think back, we're near the year anniversary of the Marshall Fire. At that time, we had the Omicron surge going on. We were very much in a pandemic response. And so there really it's been a challenge as partners, as agencies, to look at our agreements, to discuss our partnerships, and ultimately get to training and exercise. So those are the things for me that really reinforce regional partnerships and also help us succeed. We do know that day we had community members evacuate to the event center in Broomfield, and our partners there were incredible. But there were some communications challenges, coordination challenges that we continue to talk about, and we look forward to really improving on those, even looking at written agreements about how we coordinate together should we have, again, a disaster like this where we know has no boundaries.
So building off of what Chris said in the relationships and what Mike alluded to, the Healthcare Coalition functions across our 10-county region. So we really bring together 4 core partners, which is hospitals, emergency management, EMS, and public health. So in addition to our core partners that I just mentioned, we also prioritize blending in our ancillary healthcare partners. So for that group, we're looking at long-term care, skilled nursing, home health, hospice, and very importantly, behavioral health. So that's really the spectrum within which the Healthcare Coalition operates and is comprised of. We rely solely on relationships. We operate without any authority. So unlike my two panelists here, we don't operate with any authority, especially during a response. We are simply there to support those infrastructures that do have the authority and have activated. In addition to that, we are there to support our partners in whatever they may need during a response. So we have focused so much on relationship building, and I think that is really what bubbled to the surface during the Marshall Fire, is we fell upon those relationships, speaking from the Healthcare Coalition side, because we hadn't necessarily formalized all of the roles that came into play, as Chris alluded to, during the response. And one of those being the new hospital resource officer. And that was a key component. So we had 2 hospitals evacuate during this event, one very rapidly, a Vista Adventist hospital, and then one that was a little bit more of a paced evacuation that happened after a Vista evacuated. So when we heard the hospital was going to evacuate, we received a call from the emergency manager. He was trying to shelter in place. However, the smoke was becoming too much of a hazard for the patients that were in the hospital, specifically in their large NICU unit. So he went ahead and made the call to evacuate the hospital. So at that point, we needed to make sure that all of the systems were aware and we weren't duplicating efforts. So our first call was into one of our EMS leads, who happens to be with Mountain View Fire, which is one of the 8 entities that was responding to the Marshall Fire at that point in time. So when we checked in with that individual, let him know the situation, that the hospital did need to evacuate, and that we were looking to get in what we were calling at the time an EMS liaison officer to the hospital. And the goal of that position, which was conceptual in nature at that point in time, was to really link up incident command on scene with the hospital who was needing to evacuate, and also look at the resources that would be needed to move all of those patients to a safe location. So that individual from Mountain View Fire, EMS Chief Paul Johnson, was able to help identify and deploy an EMS liaison who happened to be an EMS chief from a neighboring department, North Metro Fire, Mark Doherty. So once he arrived on scene, we essentially worked directly with Chief Doherty to assess the situation and start the resource ordering process. But concurrent to that, we knew that the EOC and ESF8 were in the midst of activating, and we need to make sure that we took that into consideration. So my second call before doing anything with resources was over into Chris and his team with ESF8. So we relayed the information we had learned. He was able to relay the information that he had learned from both emergency management and his partnerships. And we came up with a plan. So at that time, we knew there were also quite a bit of residential care facilities that were needing to evacuate. And those are also very resource-heavy initiatives. So Chris and his team was going to go ahead and take on the bulk of the residential care facility evacuations. And then he went ahead and allowed the Healthcare Coalition to start working on the hospital evacuation. So that was a key point, I think, early on in the response, where we were able to touch base with a partner who does have the authority to do the resource component. And they were able to, I guess, verbally allow, delegate's a strong word, but that ability into the Healthcare Coalition.
Yeah, and I would just, again, going back to our topic of regional coordination, the Healthcare Coalition is just that, the North Central Region Healthcare Coalition, and it's the reason it exists is for that regional coordination. So it was immensely helpful. We did have EMS assets or EMS type of assets, so ambulances coming in to help with these evacuations of healthcare facilities. And it was really helpful to have Michelle have that broader picture of the resources that were out there and the Healthcare Coalition. And so we have a coordination plan with the Healthcare Coalition. I think certainly we need to go back and continue to look at that, make sure that that plan captures these types of incidents. We already have, again, Michelle mentioned a resource officer for the hospitals to really help us with that coordination around EMS. Emergency, certainly if ambulances are coming to support in a complex evacuation of a hospital. So I think that is really a best practice for us. It's been immensely helpful and it helped us. Certainly this was a big event in Boulder County, but it required resources from across the region to support the needs in this disaster.
When you look at the timing of this event and the evacuations, that I think was one of the unique parts of this, that perhaps created some challenges. I think for people that are hearing this, a lot of times we have assumptions that we carry into an event that necessarily haven't been tested through proper exercising or even through prior events. And those planning assumptions that you have that are going to create operational gaps or difficulties. And I think they were experienced here. You know, the timing of an EOC opening up, we're not 24/7, we have to assemble. I'm bringing in hundreds of people into a system that will eventually provide that support, coordination, and operational management and delivery of resources. But that takes time to bring up. And when you have your disaster moving at a fast rate of speed, it doesn't wait for you to get everything in place before it starts ripping you up. So we had 40,000 people that were being evacuated in a relatively short period of time of 3 hours or less. Within that, the 2 hospitals and 6 long-term care facilities and hundreds of resources surging in from law enforcement and fire. And the confusion of that time is going to be in every disaster. I've not ran a disaster where the first 3 to 6 hours are going to be difficult. You're not going to have perfect coordination. So as Chris and Michelle were talking about, that on the ground ability to reach out, have the prior relationship, to know how to get things and coordinate amongst a smaller operational group. We call it taking operational initiative in an area, having the ability to do that sort of at a micro level within this larger organism of a disaster that has got pockets of confusion and a blind spot here, someone's starting to get some traction over here, to someone's really gelling and creating capacity to deal with a problem. And that's what we saw here, I think what Chris and Michelle were describing. The ability to be able to get that information, communicate it, are the foundational first steps of coordination. So if you can't get information, real-time data, you don't have the communication tree or structure to move that around, the coordination is going to fail. And that's what I think happened in prior training and exercise and work, even in an unrelated lane. I think the work going on in the region around mass casualty planning carried over immensely into this event, and was it transferable skills, more importantly transferable connections and relationships that were able to create that coordination structure and what I call sort of what I call adaptive capacity, the ability not to be caught within hard structures, not able to respond to the environment you're faced with directly. The folks that they're talking about and the resources coming in had a tremendous amount of adaptive capacity due to prior planning, training, and relationship efforts. And that is going to be what you're going to have to hang your hat on in the first 3 to 6 hours as things are standing up, disasters ripping up your county or your city, resources are flying in. There's no way to possibly create a tight command and control structure, much less coordination, communication, and information management and transferring structure. So that's some of the sort of AAR pieces of the challenges around this. Is if you're hearing this and you're saying go back and look at your plan, everyone has a starting point for a plan that's usually pretty tidy. I think we don't do enough work on, I inherited something that's a mess, how do I get it unmessy to where I can start to go to work? Not solve all the problems, but just carve out that piece of operational focus that we can establish some control over what needs to be done tactically, but yet also create a coordination support structure to keep feeding into that so as the need grows, you can grow with it and not lose traction on what you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, and as Mike was talking, this really did feel quite organic. And when I'm saying organic, I'm talking about really the microcosm of the hospital evacuations and the work that we were doing. It felt like we knew the people, we knew the roles that they could play, we knew the access that they had to resources and to information, and we just capitalized upon that and did our best to bring it all together. As Mike was saying, this wasn't in a plan. We have a regional hospital coordination plan that brings all of our 28 hospitals together in an event. We were activated for COVID to utilize that, but this was such an acute, fast-moving, unpredictable event. We hadn't really gotten to that point point with the plan. So a lot of this was taking components of relationship building and trainings and exercises and other pieces of plans, and like Mike said, adapting to what we needed. But a key piece of that was understanding what role each of us could play, and then as that evolved, how that changed, right? So once the EOC structure is up and operational and has their feet under them, then we are able to kind of take a step back if appropriate, right? If that's where we fall at that point in time, and relay back or push back a lot of those responsibilities back into the EOC where they should be living with that authority. So as a healthcare coalition, you have this immediate need in front of you that you're trying to help and solve for your partners and for the community and the life safety piece, but you also need to be thinking about what's happening around you operationally and how do you make sure you're tying back into those structures. And that became critical as well into our state public health department, because they were also operationalizing to support some of the evacuations. And I think, Chris, you can talk a little bit about how that worked with your residential care.
Yeah, absolutely. So, for those that are watching other sessions, we have a full kind of session on this with the long-term care homes, assisted living homes in the community. And I think, as we all know, it's these are community members that certainly the last thing you want to do is probably move them from where they're living. It can be challenging a lot of times they'll need a special kind of transport, which was a challenge for us. And ultimately then where these community members go once they are evacuated. So we certainly, in terms of coordination with the state, we had some best practices and structures in place from the pandemic response. We had teams that had been working regularly with long-term care homes. And we were able to use those, particularly a little longer into this incident, as some other homes that weren't necessarily directly impacted by the fire yet were evacuating, and they helped us just make phone calls and make sure they connected with the homes in the area that were in the evacuation area, make sure they had what they needed if they did need to evacuate, and that was immensely helpful. So as we move forward, and those listening, I would kind of solidify those best practices from the pandemic response, make sure you're still connected with healthcare facilities, with the CDPHE, or if you're in another state watching this, make sure you're connected with those that work with long-term care homes at the state level. So that it's a really, again, these lessons learned are ones I think that we continue to look at. I did want to mention something about really the need to continue to exercise and look at your planning efforts. I think what we see is institutional knowledge, particularly over the last couple of years. A lot of folks have left their roles, their previous roles, and that was really challenging. I think we just had folks that had maybe looked at hospital evacuations, worked a little closely with long-term care homes. They were no longer with us, and so we went back to relationships, and that really helped us. However, we're now really going to take the chance now to dig into training and exercising, look at these scenarios. Again, really look at the partnerships across counties, across borders, across the region. I know we've done quite a bit more work with Larimer County. That's where we tend to see wildfires that more impact Boulder County. But to bring in Broomfield County is interesting, and I think that was unique. I think it's this fire is going to change changed our focus a little bit as a community, knowing that these types of fires can go that far into the community like they did. I mean, I think some modeling certainly anticipated that, but this really showed that we need to take a global look at the partnerships really across the region and make sure those are solidified for all hazards, not just wildfires.
Yeah, and that's another thing that we really focus on, because we are a regional entity, so we aren't tied to one jurisdiction. We really do support all 10 counties and the partners located within that geographic space. We were getting calls almost immediately from other hospitals. So our region is for the most part, urban, suburban, densely populated. We have a few areas in the plains. We have some mountain towns that are a little smaller, but we're pretty densely packed with our resources and our communities. And so, jurisdictional lines don't mean a whole lot, especially when you talk about the health and medical realm. So we had hospitals that were in close proximity, but far enough out they weren't primarily impacted, and even hospitals that were 20, 30 miles away, calling immediately saying, what can we do to help? What do we need to know? How do we get ready? What if there's a burn surge event? What if we have a lot of individuals who receive burn injuries and need to be cared for, and we've got these hospitals in the immediate area closing and evacuating? So while in this instance, the systems within the hospitals were able to work within themselves to transfer patients, and we didn't push out too far. It's an important note for us to keep in mind not to get tunnel vision into the specific area, but ensure that we're capitalizing upon the other partners we have, specifically in the health and medical space, in other jurisdictions, and making sure we're sharing information appropriately, we're collecting information like bed availability, et cetera. We're passing that to the folks who need to know, and really maintaining that situational awareness for our entire region. I know for residential care, we pulled from a number of different facilities to support their movement outside of the Boulder and Broomfield area. So that's another, we knew that. I would say that during the response, it was so fast. I don't know that we took advantage of that to the extent that we probably could have. So for the coalition itself and how we support, that's a big lesson learned, is to make sure that is one of our priorities moving forward.
I think if you look at kind of what you're talking about, Michelle, is you can't get caught up too much in response or managing something unless you're in the command or response side of this. Like Michelle's role is sort of like a regional EOC for healthcare. Someone has to be focusing on coordination. If you don't, this stuff slips away from you. Someone that can stay back, we say in our world there's crisis management, which is usually people that are pulling hose lines or have, chasing bad guys, stopping the bleeding. But we're a consequence management focus on the disaster emergency management side of things, where we're reacting to the consequences of what the incident is doing or what decisions incident command is making. And our job is to then look at that and then evaluate and see what coordination structures need to be set up. And I always look at it from a temporal and spatial perspective. So what that means is what's sort of the timeline that things are going to happen, and what is the impact by community, by agency, by need. And mapping that out and getting that onto my coordination board, and then go, I got to call Michelle, or I got to get hold of Chris, or I got to get hold of the state of Colorado, or I need to call over to Adams County or Jeffco and start talking to their emergency management director because it's coming their way. And doing those things tilts you in a sort of proactive way. It allows you to see where you need to lean into something, where you need to establish that information, communication line of effort so that the coordination can continue. And I think what you saw and what Michelle did great and others was that this was just not two hospitals that were impacted, because there was decompression going into other hospitals. So this became literally a sort of north region, probably even further hospital impact that required advanced coordination to be able to handle that. And that was just one area within probably 500 different coordination threads that we were pulling on during this event over the first 24 hours. So as for the emergency managers out there in hospitals, county level, municipal level, I think the danger is that you get caught up in the incident command and control side of response. That in the first 3 to 4 hours, in my experience, I've been on a lot of disasters, no one's breaking through doors to try to get hold of me from the incident command post, because they're busy saving lives, putting out the fire, evacuating people. And my job is to lean into them softly, where I'm not intruding into that space to distract them. And then eventually that picks up towards the middle to the back half of that first operational period. If you're built around in a hospital, the hospital incident command system, or you're down out in the field, if you're not doing it, someone needs to be doing the coordination work, because that is where, when these things are escalating and they're growing exponentially, the command and control stuff is incredibly important, but so is the coordination side. Being able to keep your policy groups engaged and involved in seeing where things are going, being able to engage sectors of your community, from the business sector to healthcare to education, it goes on, and then getting into multiple counties, then to the state, because there's declarations being declared, there's resources that need to be requested. And in my world, I'm looking at not the moment in front of me, but I'm looking at where I'm gonna connect and maybe lasso this together. I'm never gonna stop Mother Nature, but I am gonna eventually get something attached to it where I'm gonna be able to work with where she's taking us, as opposed to just having her punch us into a corner. And that means we live in that world of chaos for hours to days, and then eventually things start to grab some continuity, and it's because of the coordination. Because incident command, if they can't get the basics first, the food, the water, the gas, the fuel, they're going to lose capacity. And then it's about bringing in more capacities or capabilities to add more capacity. And the whole role that we serve is bring more in so we can do more, because more's happening, and make sure it all stays coordinated. Because the minute we lose that, things get pretty much, we say, like, turns into a dumpster fire pretty quick. And a lot of times we have to rebuild what we built, because we had good coordination and structure here, and then we lost it because I call it entropy. For people that are worried about chaos theory, what you put structure to will be dissolved and frayed if you don't pay attention to it. And that's what you're doing through a whole disaster over the course of your response, is trying to get structure here through coordination, resource support, capability application over here now, and then this gets frayed. All right, back here. So you're bouncing around, trying to maintain this continuity on top of the coordination effort you're making. So I think they did a great job with that, with the amount of problems that they had for the period of time that they had. And I think it's, like you said, the relationships, the ability to get the resources, to maintain the connection, and be able to keep adapting to the problems that were out there that are coming. Because no one pulls out a 40-page plan and looks at it. So if I had to give a best practice, is for your people that are responding, for the planners out there, is make sure you deliver them adequate job aids, checklist, whatever that is, that can be in the pocket, in the clipboard, in the ambulance, in the fire truck, whatever that is, so that they can pull it out to know, here's the steps. I call it sort of get out of the gate steps, to get out of the gate good, you're gonna be all right. Those sort of things are important to have with your planning efforts. And like Chris says, you got to get the muscle memory, and that's only comes with doing it. You got to get people out there physically doing these things, practicing them. Otherwise, the practice is the event, and that can be difficult on people, and can really stress your systems to the point of failure.
I did want to mention the just another structure we have in place in the North Central region. We have a public health committee, and definitely have agreements with other local public health agencies to support Emergency Support Function 8. We worked with Jefferson County, for example, during this. We had a shelter at the YMCA where we had community members there for several nights, and they definitely had access and functional needs. They need oxygen concentrators, certain cots or beds that would be helpful for them. And so Jefferson County has an access and functional needs trailer, and that was really helpful for us. And so we had partners, because we've gone through these planning efforts together on a regional level, supporting each other with supplies and equipment, and that was really helpful. So it's a structure we have in place that we'll continue to, in any of these incidents or events, definitely utilize. Even as far back as the floods in 2013 in Boulder County, we had staff at our emergency operations centers from other public health agencies. They're familiar with the SF8. So for those who are listening, I think as we dig into that training and exercising, you might want to bring staff from other public health agencies into your emergency operations center, into that role at the SF8. Because what we know, these can be long incidents. The flood was it felt like weeks long. It was definitely several days long. We're operating a 24/7 emergency operations center, and that can be really challenging with staffing. So to have additional support for that coordination role from other public health agencies is something to think about.
So if you look at kind of melding both of those ideas together, utilizing partners and assets and capabilities from outside of your jurisdiction, as well as kind of that job action sheet idea, the what we're calling the hospital resource officer now. That was very conceptual in nature. We had talked about it. It's actually an idea borrowed from the 1 October shooting in Las Vegas. Chief Troy Tuke kind of pulled that together, and we've modified and tried to adopt it, but it wasn't in a plan anywhere. It was really in some heads that were involved, happened to be involved in this. We were working on formalizing it, but we hadn't gotten to that point. So when Chief Doherty, who served as our resource officer for both Avista and the Good Samaritan patient movement process, arrived on scene, we were kind of throwing this together, and that included myself, Chief Paul Johnson, Chris Malyard from Avista, and obviously Chief Doherty. So we basically built that job action sheet as he was going through the process, and that worked okay. So what we were then able to do is, as Avista was terminating their evacuation, patients, staff, et cetera, had all been safely relocated, and they were shutting that facility down. We learned that Good Samaritan, which is a level 2 trauma center, was ready and looking to evacuate as well. And they were going to start with their highly critical intensive care unit patients. And so before Chief Doherty could get too far, I reached out to him and said, hey, we need to do a rinse and repeat over at Good Samaritan. So all of those activities and functions and communication bridges that you developed while you were on scene at Avista, do it again, but over at Good Samaritan. We're going to send the resources over there. You're going to meet up with their emergency manager, and we're going to just do this again. So we essentially built that, and he just replayed that again. So I think back to both of these points, what we're doing now with the position is building job action sheets so that it doesn't have to be Chief Doherty who is on scene. It can be any, fire, EMS, even law enforcement, position that can show up and know what their core initiatives are going to be, and how they're going to carry that out will be determined by the event and who they're working with. But they know what their core objectives are. And to pull in the rest of the region, we know that in a lot of events that primarily impacted jurisdiction, or even the ones surrounding it, are overwhelmed. Their resources are overwhelmed. Everybody is focused in on that response. So what we want to do is train all of our first responder networks across the region, and have them be familiar with this role, so that we could call up from a jurisdiction 2 counties away and say, this hospital needs someone to tie into incident command. We need some coordination efforts to occur. Can you go ahead and deploy there? So it taught us that job action sheet is really critical to having a successful implementation of a role, as well as the importance of needing to look outside of our jurisdictions and pulling additional partners in to fulfill that. We were very lucky. These hospital evacuations were consecutive. Had they been concurrent and happening at the same time, that would have been a much different story. And that's something that we're also looking through and trying to figure out, how is that going to look, and how do we magnify this coordination activity across multiple hospitals and potentially multiple jurisdictions in an event, and still try to keep that focus where it needs to be, and keep that coordination under our thumb to the best of our ability.
Yeah, and just a little finer point on that role we're creating, the hospital resource officer. It's not just for an evacuation of a hospital. If it's a mass casualty incident, you have you're trying to coordinate across hospitals to take on critical patients. We envision this role helping out with that coordination. We know a lot of EMS ambulances, assets are going to be coming to hospitals. So for folks watching, we absolutely can share that information, share the things we're creating in terms of standard operating procedures and job action sheets, and we believe in those lessons learned we've had with these evacuations. It's going to be immensely helpful should we see a mass casualty incident in the area.
I think you bring up a point that just kind of spawned something for me, with this being just one hospital and a rolling evacuation need. Definitely need to spend more time around what happens if 4 different counties are affected and 4 different hospitals are going to be in need. I think that's a good planning effort. During the 2013 flood here in Boulder, the entire county was flooding simultaneously for 4 consecutive days. There were impacts all over the place, and the scarcity of resource was prevalent. So it kind of highlights the level for higher level coordination structures. We were able to deal with those here's a need and here's the resource, and they don't match up. Was able to engage agency representatives, agency administrators, or the people, the elected officials, city managers, fire chiefs, police chiefs, all the folks that are high-level decision makers, and bringing them together to a central coordination point to give good situational awareness, which once again is the EOC kind of harping on that. Real time, getting it and maintaining it are the goals of the EOC around situational awareness, so that when this thing pops up, you're able to bring people together fast, bring them up to speed, get them up to 9,000 RPM on the tachometer, and then say, here's the decision you got to make. You don't have enough resource to go around. Where do you want them to go? Because someone's not getting something today. And that's a hard call to make. I don't know if we have that level of regional coordination yet in the metro area. I don't know if that's, you got to walk before you run, but for those that are watching it, that would be something to look at. I would say that we were lucky in the stance that had that been a healthcare campus more than it was, that would have been a real major challenge I don't know we would have overcame. And I think we would have had some hard outcomes to face had that been the case. I know there's other areas in the community where you'll find 3 or 4 significant hospitals all located within a 3-4 block campus. So looking at that sort of threat assessment around that is going to be important to put into your planning assumptions about what sort of capacity you have to build locally. I think hospitals have a tendency to think within their structure across their system. I know there's a lot of mutual aid environment there. I'm not as versed as the other two here are, but it feels like that's the case where there's maybe not as much integration. So that would be something, if you have it, that's great, but if you don't, then I would be recommending that you tear those system designed structures apart and get more coordination built in, if at least nothing else during the disaster. Otherwise, you're going to be figuring that out on your own at the time, and you won't know who to call. You won't even have the number in your contact list, and that'll make it harder to be able to move through that need of adaptive capacity at the time when you're trying to face that multiple hospital, larger campus evacuation phase.
So I did want to go back to a point, I think, for folks listening around the local coordination. And again, you've heard us talk a little bit about the many disasters we've seen in Boulder County. At our Emergency Operations Center, we really do have to kind of delegate or work with different capacities with our emergency support functions. And so certainly Mike, as the disaster manager, can't take that all on. So we, as Mike mentioned, we have 30 ESFs. We meet regularly, monthly with that group to exercise and really to get to know each other, understand our capabilities, understand what we're bringing to the table in these disasters. So everyone had a role during the Marshall Fire response. And so Mike mentioned the hundreds of coordination efforts that go on. With ESFA, with public health, we take our roles, again, with mass care and sheltering, that support of evacuations, the support of various healthcare needs, including the hospitals. So it's an important point for those listening that as you work with your emergency management partners, you work with your structure and how you respond, your response structure. It's crucial to be organized and have everyone understand their capability and role within that ESF or emergency support function structure.
Thing that you're talking about with knowing what capabilities you have, Chris, that I think is an important piece, but also the other side of that, I think a lot of times in hospital design systems, a lot of command and control systems, people don't really think about coordination. And that is an important piece to find in your plan, not just sort of the roles and responsibilities from a tactical perspective, but then also what are the coordination points that you have. I think that you brought up, I have 100 things to manage. I need what PJ, or Paul Johnson, as we call him PJ, as Paul is out there working the field, somehow that information has to get back to us. And Paul's not going to have a direct radio channel into me, nor is he going to want to, but he's going to develop something that is going through the command response piece that's going to make it somehow into Michelle or Chris. And if we didn't have our ESF what we call multi-agency coordination group back at the EOC kind of set up to kind of be the antenna that captures that stuff gets lost. And that's powerful information because it lets us know automatically then that, okay, they got it, the hospital's getting evacuated, we're not gonna have a mass fatality, I don't need to be thinking about that, and we can move forward onto the next thing. So it's moving through these pathways from field back in through whatever command structure, and eventually is getting into CRIS as an ESF, and that's being replicated across our EOC with all those 30 ESF. That's the whole significance of having that. So it's not saying you have to run an ESF model in an EOC. It doesn't mean you need to run an EOC, but when your hospital or your healthcare system is being impacted, there needs to be a structure or capability within your response structure that is putting and elevating coordination as much as incident command decision making. It's less required and prevalent when you're dealing with a lower complexity incident, but when you're getting into these disaster environments, and I've been through quite a few, the coordination is as equally important as the command and control decision making. And if you don't have those two things in equilibrium, things will suffer, and you'll find that you will experience a lot of variance in your response and the capacity that you're able to maintain longer term. So
Yeah, and Mike, getting to a common operating picture and situational awareness, we've heard this group mention that a lot. It's that is what is helpful there. So each ESF, it's for a few staff to hold that knowledge doesn't work. Mm-hmm. So we're coordinated with the Healthcare Coalition. We were coordinated with Broomfield as well. And so bringing that information in a regular briefing was critical. And as clearly this fast-moving event unfolded, we were like anything that would happen here. Initially you're piecing things together with that common operating picture, and as we got further into the day, Mike felt comfortable as a disaster manager that the hospital's being evacuated, understands what's going on there. Us at ESF8 or Public Health is coordinating that, and we move on to the next coordination issue. So that's it's really important. I think it's something I've experienced working with this group, and Mike mentioned our multi-agent coordinating system. I do think we're very good at situational awareness and starting to create that common operating picture, because we're just more efficient in how we work with each other that way.
Yeah, the next piece of that too is kind of pivoting to another layer is talking about how it comes from the field into the EOC is that I'm working to bring in the state. So we have field managers that will respond to our EOC. They'll set up camp. They are direct line back into the State Emergency Operations Center. They also have ESFs up there. We can request more resources through them if we need them. But they also have connectivity now into the ESF8 at the state, which is the state health department. So Chris is doing it through his normal pathways and relationships, but then we're also creating a redundant ability to coordinate. So if something were to happen with that connection point, that field manager is in my hip pocket and then able to execute that state level coordination and maintain traction there. So this whole thing is going on multiple planes. That local coordination that I'm responsible for, getting maybe to the regional side is a little high for me. I'm relying on my ESF8 contacts to bring in the Healthcare Coalition and that sort of thing. I'm going to be working with my other county emergency managers, but that's this whole, this dance, so to speak, that is going on at the same time across multiple layers of government, multiple disciplines, multiple jurisdictions, and then multiple problem sets. I don't know how we do it all the time. I think part of it is there's no plan for that, which is what you have to be comfortable with when you're in a disaster environment, is that many times there is no plan for what you're dealing with. And you have to be comfortable with that. And it's been highlighted here with the relationships, the things that, the training, the exercise, all those things are going to help you, but they're not going to solve every disaster problem you're going to encounter. You're going to have to be good on your feet, quick to bring people together, be able to develop capabilities on the fly, and that should be as much of your planning focus and your exercise tempo is how do you do that? Because I've had to create a lot of things very quickly because we didn't see it, didn't know it at the time, and you find yourself, as we like to say, we're all of a sudden now we're doing untethered spacewalk, and we didn't plan on doing that when we started out this morning at breakfast. So that's that adaptive capacity, to give it more of a formal name that I was talking about earlier, is if you don't have that in your hospital system and that's not in your DNA, you're going to be like a very strong oak tree in a very strong wind that's just going to either hold the day, and then when you can't, you're just going to snap. And there will be no, so to give you the metaphor, is be more like a willow in a disaster than the mighty oak is the way to be.
Just speaking on the common operating picture piece really quick in the hospital side, and that adaptability. So, this fire was moving and people weren't really sure where it was going. I mean, it was unpredictable. So we had other hospitals who were looking at potentially evacuating, both during the Avista evacuation and the Good Sam. So what we were able to do was keep them in the loop about what was happening at these other hospitals that were closer to that kind of impact point, and then they could make decisions and adapt to what was available or not available and what was the priority at the time. So we had a facility in Broomfield who was looking to potentially evacuate, but they knew resources were heavy into Good Sam, were just finishing up at Avista, and that was the priority because of where the threat was. So what they were able to do with that information, and knowing that Good Sam had just kicked off their evacuation, so they weren't close to being done, is they were able to start to order resources that are internal to their system down from other regions and up from other regions, a private ambulance provider, and start to bring those resources together and sort of stage them. So if they did have to pull the trigger, they were doing everything they could to not pull from what was already going on. So again, I think that shows adaptability, because if your hospital is going to evacuate, most folks would say, well, we're going to get all the EMS providers we can and we're going to get them moved out and da-da-da-da. That's great. But what if those EMS providers are already at a hospital level 2 that's in the middle of an ICU evacuation, right? You can't pull them from that, right? So then what do you have to do? What's your next step? But having that common operating picture and understanding what's going on around them, I think was crucial for them to be able to set themselves up to be successful, but also not take away from the other evacuations, the other events, the other needs, life safety needs that were occurring in their area.
And I don't know if this happened, but because my head was down in another sort of plane of this level of this disaster, but to Michelle's point, the ability to bring that structure together where people can join in and get real-time information is absolutely critical to prevent over-response. And over-response will kill you in a disaster because you do not have enough resources for that. So being in this type of fire, you're talking 120-mile-an-hour winds, we're talking basically a Category 2 hurricane with fire introduced to it. And the rotor action, it was keeping the smoke very close to the ground. Debris was falling into neighborhoods where most times you have a thermal plume that goes up, and people were feeling threatened by this fire, and some were very threatened, but others were not, as in higher risk level. And these institutions like hospitals and schools and long-term care centers, you just don't evacuate that in 30 minutes. So the ability to get them into a coordination structure to get real-time information, so they are thinking, should we be starting to pull the trigger on this or not, is critical. And I don't know how that went because I wasn't totally privy to that, but I feel like at some level that went well, but I don't know how it went beyond maybe a certain regional aspect to it. So it's probably something we need to do. So Chris,
Mike,
go ahead.
Well, I like anything, there's areas where we can improve, but that structure we've talked about. So with the public North Central Region Public Health Committee and those partnerships we formed, the North Central Region Healthcare Coalition, Michelle was helping coordinate that. We have a coordination plan. That was the structure. So it did provide situational awareness. Our hospital partners, we meet regularly with them, with the emergency managers, so they knew here's where you get information. We know it's impacting Boulder County. So we send out we basically say that the plan has been deployed and here's how we're going to coordinate. Most of it's done, I think, by email. I don't know if we ever got to the coordination call. I was doing a lot of things. But we definitely have coordination calls where then folks can get situational awareness, and if it needs to be real time, it's that phone call to Michelle and others to really understand the situation, and if you should be setting up, being prepared, or doing some of that pre-work. I will say, I think we did with the Good Sam Hospital. I think that was a situation where I think there were basically ambulances just sitting there waiting, and I think in this situation we knew that there was a lot of equipment and resources deployed, kind of self-deployed, or just everything kind of came to Boulder County. So that happens as well, but I think it was just part of the uniqueness of this particular fire incident.
And we didn't, it was really in the perspective of COVID, and even this most recent pediatric surge, this was a very acute, short event, right? But we did have coordination calls. They just didn't happen until the next morning. So as we start to talk about recovery, right, we now have an 82-bed hospital that is offline in a time where we are in the Omicron surge. I want to say that morning we had 1 or 2% availability in ICU and med-surg beds across our entire 28 hospital region. So we didn't have the ability to lose a hospital and have it go offline. So that's when we started to do the coordination calls, was how do we now make this system work when we've got a hospital that is no longer usable and we don't know when it's coming back. So
I think that highlights the recovery piece there for the importance of coordination. So we experience that across. In my experience in managing disasters, the response side has kind of layered structures that help keep things together, or some glue. So you have an incident command, maybe multiple different communities. I know the hospitals will set up incident command structures. It's going to be different from the incident command that's maybe putting out the fire. So there's all these structural pieces in play to kind of overlap and keep things moving forward. But when we get to recovery, now the fire goes out. And we also had a snowstorm like within the next 30 hours. But the fire goes out. Now that command structure starts to demobilize. And then the recovery comes in, and the firefighters and the cops have evacuated people, but we still got shelters with thousands of people in it. We still have hospitals that need to be repopulated. The infrastructure is gone because the water system is down. There's no electricity, there's no gas. You just don't go, okay, everyone back in the ambulance, let's take you back to your hospital and just restore things. You got a hospital with ash in it and all the things that come with it. And I've found recovery is always the harder lift. And it's also the place where you find more coordination struggles, because the structures of response are starting to dismantle. People are tired because everyone surges for the hyperactivity of response, but then no one held anyone back to manage the recovery. So now you have less personnel. You still have a lot of things that need to go. The time scale is now longer. The list is deeper. The people are fewer. And you sacrifice structure and coordination for tactics. So pay attention to that, because you will then have massive coordination struggles. And I myself experienced them with things that I thought were being put under some sort of coordination or management structure. And then a problem is when you realize you don't have it. And then, as you say, cleaning up spilled milk takes a lot longer than just putting it in a safe space. So it's sort of that kind of mentality you have to have, is can't let your guard down. You need to be hyper vigilant, and you may even need to shift your coordination structures, because what you used in response is not going to be needed, because there's a whole new set of players that are going to need to be coordinated with. So I don't know what thoughts you have on that.
But well, we saw that with the long-term care, assisted living homes.
Right.
They struggled with that recovery a little bit. Mm-hmm. I think, again, it was they stepped in there, did what they needed to do for the response, and it was the same thing. It was over the holidays. They were tired, mm-hmm. But they needed to get folks back in their homes, and they had to make sure their facilities were safe, mm-hmm. and that took a lot of work. So I think it is a lesson for our partners listening that. One of these days we'll figure out the recovery structures. I've experienced that as well, Mike, with the large disasters we've had. It's challenging to transition into that short-term and longer-term recovery. And so I think as we're talking with partners on this, we gotta commit to similar recovery structures as we have for response, plan for them. What are we going to do? How are we going to return folks to facilities? What does a reunification look like? What are your plans? Do you have contractors you're going to work with to look at your HVAC system? And so I think both with the hospitals and the long-term care assisted living homes, it'd be a good thing to look at along with your response plans.
And what we saw with the hospitals, we had one hospital, I'm talking about really Avista now and that Centura system, but we had one hospital who was now trying to rebuild their hospital. I mean, they had to empty that facility out essentially and rebuild and clean from the inside out. And that miraculously only took about 19 days, I want to say, 19 or 20 days, which is pretty impressive for the amount of smoke damage, et cetera, that was done. But what that evacuation did was it created a surge in another hospital. So they have another sister hospital that they transported the vast majority of these patients to. And it created almost an unmanageable surge then at this next hospital. So while this one is cleaning up and empty and they're putting a lot of resources in here, you've got another facility that is trying to now manage this extreme volume, some of critical, NICU babies. So that was a lesson learned, I think, on the hospital side is try not to create that secondary surge. So that coordination even on the back end is important so that you're not creating another problem in another area.
Every exercise you do in every event, no matter how large or small, you need to spend time doing hot wash debrief, AAR cycle, and then gathering those things that are difficult, the gaps, getting them to improvement plan, and this is where everything fails, is that people will do the hot wash, they'll do the debrief, they'll write the report. It goes into a mythical place where everyone assumes that it's going to somehow fix or develop the capabilities that you identified as needing to be worked on. And then the next disaster becomes the first time you realize that no one did anything with it. So I just want to really highlight that the after action report is important, but more importantly, the improvement planning, figuring out what it is you need to work on, putting into a POETI model, which is an acronym for, do you have the right plans? Do you have the right organization? Do you have the right equipment, the training and exercise to go back and fill those gaps, and looking at it through that lens to make sure you're in a continuous improvement model is important. That's what we've done in Boulder, every incident, and that has led to some strong DNA and has helped us through the many multiple disasters that we've handled, or the many that we've handled at the same time, that without that cycle of everything, we would not have the capacities that we've had. And doesn't mean we're perfect. We have so many problems that we need to work on and gaps, as everyone does, because everything just changes, but it closes the gap. And I think that's important to highlight here. So if you don't have that strong ethic or commitment from your organization, whoever is responsible for that should be a high priority for you.
Thank you, Mike. I think that's a really good point to end us with our discussion on regional coordination today. Of course, I would like to thank both of our panelists for taking the time to participate, share their experiences, share their wisdom, lessons learned, and what they're doing to continue to improve their community and their partnerships. But we'd all like to thank you at home for watching this video and the video series on the Marshall Fire. We really do hope you're able to take at least one piece of information away that will help you and your organization better prepare for whatever may come your way in the future. Thank you.